Pipefy is the most complex GTM school anyone could go through. First of all, it's global. Second, you have SMB customers that love you. You have enterprise customers that love you. That adds another layer of complexity. Third, you're talking about horizontal product. Every single department of every single company in the world is a potential customer. At ServiceNow, they have a super horizontal platform, but they started owning one persona, which was the IT. They really nailed one use case, which was ITSM. And then after they were in, IT professionals also started to realize, oh, you know what? I can actually use this platform for a lot of other stuff. Now we're going into revenue acceleration mode. But even though it is a small niche to start, those are 7,000 companies in Brazil. That's enough in the sense of like, how fast can I get to the first 1, 2, 3 millions of ARR?
What you said is one of the top pieces of advice of Paul Graham. Like, it's better to have 100 customers who absolutely love you than like 1,000 customers who somehow like you. Felipe, it's a pleasure to have you at TGC Operators. Welcome to the J-Curve.
Thanks so much. I learned a bunch from many folks in the podcast, so super honored to be here.
I actually thought that we're going to start with a story. Before the recording, you told me that your first real 0 to 1 build was actually not SaaS. It was an experience in Brazil's largest children's hospital where you helped build a fundraising function, created a trainee program, sold projects to executives. Can you go back to that chapter and retell that story?
That story starts even one chapter before. My first job was at the American Chamber of Commerce. I was a trainee on the sales program there. Did really well. And then my boss from the American Chamber of Commerce hit me up like a few weeks after he left and said, hey, I'm joining this hospital in Brazil. It's the largest children's hospital, philanthropic organization. And I'm looking to build a small team to start the fundraising department. So Brazil had approved at that time some fiscal incentives that allowed large organizations to send part of their taxes, instead of sending them to the government, send to projects that were pre-approved and would benefit like social
and
projects.
It's actually the essence of philanthropy, right?
Exactly.
Because it has to make sense from the business perspective.
So the hospital had approved a project. It was a big investment at that time, had no clue how to fundraise that money, found a group of young people that also had no clue how to fundraise that money, but had experience selling or had the energy or willing to do it. And then he invited me to, with a group of other 2 people, start to build a plan to fundraise that amount. It was at that time like 10 million reais or something like that. So think about like $3 million at the time. And that for me sounded kind of interesting, right? I was like, interesting social responsibility, build something from scratch. I didn't know at that time, but it was a pretty entrepreneurial experience. Like the hospital is a centenary organization.
Because you didn't have a playbook, right? Like there was no like initiatives like that you could say, okay, these guys did that and, we can do the same thing.
The incentives were new. There was no people that we could really learn from. But it sounded super exciting and sounded exciting from the perspective of like generating social impact and building something from scratch. So we started as a team of 3 people. And in the beginning, it was kind of literally sitting with accountants and trying to understand what the hell are those incentives? What do they mean for companies? Like, how do we sell this? In Brazil, there is a lot of like you go with a narrative that is like, look, please, like those children need your help. And so even though the objective
it's like
behind...
almost like a begging and everybody's doing you a favor.
Exactly. And that's kind of how nonprofit organizations like operated in Brazil for a long period of time, like this begging approach and so on. And so from the start, we started to understand like, hey, how can we make this something that is interesting? How can we turn that into incentives?
Like a business proposal.
Business proposal, where we go to them and say, hey, you actually have an amount of money that costs you 0. You can direct to a project. You can make a massive social impact. And eventually we can get you your logo in a name a floor of this hospital. We have like 350,000 patients, like 350,000, like the numbers were insane. Like the number of surgeries and atendimentos and like people that were like staying in the hospital, like insane amounts, a lot of visibility. So when we started to understand that from the beginning and really trying to understand how can we make a proposal that is like undeniable. So instead of going and knocking someone's door like, hey, please help the children, they need it a lot. It was like, hey, this is the work that hospital does. It's absolutely unbelievable. And by the way, it costs you 0 to support this initiative. And I can get your logo in this floor that has like insane visibility, and you can like take a lot of this from even like a marketing perspective, right?
So, and it's free, right?
And it's absolutely free. So we started to knock on people's doors and talk to companies. A lot of companies didn't even know those incentives existed at that time.
You correct me if I'm wrong, but while you were trying to nail down this business proposal format, you delivered more than 350 pitches to executives. Is that about right?
Oh yeah, a lot more than that. But yes, in the first year, I guess I think that was it. And we're literally trying to move away from like the begging piece to like, hey, how do I deliver value? And actually have a very interesting proposal for your company. We quickly, I think, learned and understand that we couldn't rely only on the social aspect, but if we tied both things together, like I think the exercise behind how I'm going to pitch something that they just can't say no. So that was the initial plan. I thought like we would go there and we're going to fundraise, we're going to wrap up that project, and maybe that's going to open doors for the next stages. But after a couple of years, when we nailed that, we actually realized there was a much, much larger opportunity. So literally to continue to scale that, deploy other projects for other audiences, because companies that could use those benefits were super large organizations. But we started to think literally from a portfolio of projects, how can I have small companies to invest? And how can I get individuals to invest? Individuals could also leverage their tax incentives. So we almost started to think from a perspective of a portfolio of projects for the different audiences and how we could craft like a proposal that would be undeniable for each one of them. So that initial story that was supposed to last a couple of years ended up turning to 8 years at the hospital. We grew a team of like more than 50 people and we were fundraising like this.
And raised like over $20 million, right?
Yeah. It was literally scaling a bit of a sales organization inside a philanthropic large hospital. The social impact, growing the team, it turned out to be like an amazing experience.
If you were like to describe the playbook that you ended up assembling together from all of those early experiences, how would you describe that playbook?
Yeah, I think one thing that we leveraged that worked extremely well, at our experience at the American Chamber, before the American Chamber had an incredible playbook of attracting talent. So basically what they did, they had a massive recruiting program all over Brazil. So they would recruit 80 trainees every batch for 6 months. They were divided in and I'll get to the hospital in a second, but that was the inspiration. 80 trainees divided in 8 different capitals. They had like thousands of people that subscribed to be part of the program. So they were able to select super young, but super high potentials. And then those people, they would throw into like insane competition, like 6 months of competition. So as the 8 different cities, the teams in the cities competing against each other, every Friday on the wall, there was a ranking, like which city was in first place. And every Friday there was on the wall, like out of the 80 trainees in Brazil, who was the first and who was the last one. And that model, like it was an insane school of sales, both in terms of attracting talent, but also like just getting people to like learn on a day-to-day, and like very old school sales in the sense of like, you do everything. You prospect, you call, you schedule, you visit, you close, you get the check and that. So it was amazing school to start. And then we started to think like, can we replicate this for the hospital? Would like people coming out of the university be excited to work here or not? And we decided to try. And that was an insane success. The hospital is in Curitiba, south of Brazil. It became like one of the most known trainee programs. And we had like 3,000 candidates for 10 positions. It allowed us, first of all, to bring really talented people, right? And then after bringing those super talented people, we would throw them into this very intense program for the first 6 months. It was literally like in the streets every single day selling. And we, of course, add a lot of training and like teaching those folks. But I think the core component was bringing people that were outliers from capacity and competency. And then after those 6 months, basically the ones that did super well, we would retain and would start sending them into different specific projects. Then into the tax incentives, because this initial project was like more focused into the SMBs, but then we'd graduate them into the other projects, selling to large organizations and large enterprise. So at that time, that was early, 2006 or something like that. So it was not a lot of science at that time. It was brute force, attitude, initiative, with a super strong culture, extremely motivated people that really believed in the why of why we're doing things.
The brute force and being creative and figuring things out, that was a little bit of a recurring theme in the future ventures.
Yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about the Pipefy, obviously, because when Alessio, the founder of Pipefy, called you while you were finishing INSEAD, you said that your reaction was basically, I think you're calling the wrong guy. Because you were not a tech person, right? You were not a SaaS person. You hadn't built a software sales org before. What do you think Alessio see in you that you didn't see in yourself back then?
That's a very good question. Alessio and I were friends from college. So he followed the journey at the hospital, right? So he knew everything that we went through. And I think what he really admired was exactly the culture that we built in terms of attracting talent, developing talent, and building a super strong culture. The thing that he said is like, man, what I need is people to help me build the right culture. I think you're smart enough to figure that out, and I need people to help me build.
Which is very counterintuitive because Pipefy is a little bit of a product-led growth type of company, right? So you would think that you would want like hardcore engineers who know how to do PLG, right?
Exactly.
And it was the opposite, basically.
Exactly, right? And we started with the PLG thesis, and then we went to the story. I can tell a little bit of how that started to change, but very counterintuitive. As you mentioned, I had never worked with technology, right? I barely knew what SaaS was, I think, at that time, or like workflow solutions. And I always had this very, very strong imposter syndrome. Has been something that has followed me.
I feel like every single overachiever I meet has imposter syndrome.
And then I was
It's a
like,
given.
oh my God. But at the same time, my core goal coming out of the MBA at INSEAD was also to find a project that was as excited as I was at the hospital. You said, I know what, let's go for it. So joined in the very early stage, and I think from the beginning it was fun and challenging because I even remember we had like first investors, and I was like, man, honestly, like, how do you think those investors see me leading the sales org in the early days? And Alessio is this extremely transparent, very direct guy, right? And he was like, they definitely see that as a red flag, right? Like, why don't you bring someone that has already done that? But he was like, but I think we can do it, man. That was a kind of a tricky and exciting start. And that also made me, I think in the end, like always had this imposter syndrome, but as life progressed, I started to realize that was my superpower, because that's what forced me into the mindset of like, if I put on the energy.
It's just the beginner's mindset, right? When you just like run faster because you have more to prove, you have more to learn.
That's exactly it. So the mindset was like, if I have a chance to do this, I have to play this as this is the final game of the season.
Pipefy is such an interesting company because it started relatively early in the tech cycle in Brazil, when literally everybody was building copycats and trying to raise money on the Uber of this and Airbnb of that thesis. And Pipefy thesis was not that. And even right now, you still can count the number of companies with global ambitions, maybe like on two hands at this point, but back then maybe like on one hand. So I'm really curious, like throughout this almost a decade, right, of
10
experience,
years.
what did you learn from Alessio about company building that impacted how you operate today?
I learned a lot from Alessio. He's an incredible entrepreneur, and it was amazing to partner with him for 10 years. I think there's a couple things that I would definitely highlight. One is that like it takes someone like Alessio to start a company like Pipefy, because like that vision and that almost like a stubborn belief in the sense of, because everyone would probably say like, man, you're going to start this global workflow solution. There's so many workflow platforms out there. Like, who in the hell
Like, what are you
would be
talking
crazy to do that, right? But like he had experience like building a company before. He went through the pain. Like, man, I needed solutions like this, and I didn't found there is a pain in the market. And I'm gonna build it, and I'm gonna do it global from day one. So I think that vision and that stubborn belief in terms of like, I see there is a pain in the market. If there is a pain, there is opportunity, right? I think that connects a little bit. We'll connect with the Camu journey, which seems also like a red ocean taken market. But then if you go a few layers down, like there is a lot of pain. People are struggling. People have the need. So I think that's one thing that he, from the beginning, he was very clear, like, hey, I see the opportunity very clearly. And I think the other thing that has been incredible to learn from him, he's just absolutely obsessed by understanding the bottlenecks of the business. So it's a very, very objective approach to what is the bottleneck that is holding us back now, and going extremely deep on understanding like the root cause of everything that is working and everything that is not working.
Pipefy was a very horizontal product. We were talking about that before, and you said that your like GTM at Camu is almost inverse version of your GTM strategy in Pipefy. So I'm very curious, what was hard about building GTM around something that could theoretically be used by everyone?
Yeah. Pipefy is the most complex GTM school anyone could go through. Think about this. First of all, it's global, right? So you're talking about different markets. So this is one. Second, you have SMB customers that love you. You have enterprise customers that love you, right? So that adds another layer of complexity. Third, you're talking about horizontal product, every single department of every single company in the world is a potential customer. So you can sell to everyone. And then on top of that, you go to market through inbound, you do outbound, and then you have like channels and GSI selling your product as well. So you think about all of the different layers that can like escalate in terms of complexity. It's ultra complex. And this thing about selling to everyone and everyone being a potential customer, of course, I guess investors would look at this like it's an insane market.
You can't be everything to everyone.
Exactly,
Like,
right?
what's your differentiation?
So the market opportunity is insane, but at the same time, from a go-to-market perspective, how do you go to market if trying to sell everything to everyone? And if you don't have that clarity, and it took a lot
And
of
not
time.
becoming a commodity, right? Because you're not
Generalist.
sugar or honey or rice.
And being super
me.
generalist, not going deep enough into understanding those customers' problems and so on. So that was a massive challenge that we went through, and it took us several years to actually understand the dynamics behind that. And until we understood that, like, we overpowered through a lot of brute force as well.
So what was the moment when you realized that everyone can use it, can actually become a GTM trap?
That realization came a few years down the road. The way we went to market in the beginning kind of hid that inefficiency from us. And what do I mean by that? At the beginning, Pipefy grew through an inbound sales process.
Okay, for those people who don't know what Pipefy is, maybe like tell a little bit about Pipefy.
The core thesis of how Pipefy started was to build a workflow platform that empowered people, business users, to build and deploy workflows on their own. So think about like 10 years ago, the challenge of someone trying to deploy workflow was like, it's expensive, it's time consuming, it's heavily dependent on IT. So Pipefy started with that thesis, like no code, low code workflow application to empower people to build stuff on their own. The initial thesis was a little bit more towards the SMB because we initially thought like, who's going to need that? Like large organizations already have workflow platforms and so on. But very quickly we started to realize that maybe that wasn't true, because even in the early days of Pipefy, we started to see some large organizations signing up to test the product. It was kind of intriguing in the beginning, like people from massive banks in Brazil.
Like Itaú was saying that, right?
Exactly. And then we reach out to those guys like, hey, tell me what you're looking for. Like,
why are you using
you have all kinds of corporate workflow solutions inside the bank that you can use. And those folks are saying, yes, we have all kinds of workflow applications here. But the problem that I'm trying to solve, the bank is massive. I'm a business leader here in one department. I have a pain that is very relevant to my team and to my area. But in the stack rank of priorities for the bank,
it's like on the list of 100 plus.
So I don't get support from IT. I'm in the backlog of IT, and actually all of those solutions, they require a project, a budget, hours of like developers to deploy. And then we started to realize that actually the biggest opportunity was across large organizations, and also like empowering people across business areas to accelerate digital transformation. And then partner with IT, because it started to look at us like, wow, this is actually an opportunity. I already have some workflow platforms where I can keep the core, hardcore workflows from the business, but I have this massive list of opportunities, hundreds of workflows across the business areas, where I would love to empower with governance business teams to build some of the stuff on their own, right? So that was the core value proposition of Pipefy, was empower people to build stuff. And we started thinking about the business areas, and then we kind of shifted our thought around like, well, maybe we should sell to IT and so on. That took us a while to realize as well. But then what was the challenge? In the beginning, we sold through an inbound process. Why that was hiding some of those inefficiencies and our lack of understanding? Because through an inbound process, and we were able to actually do that well in the beginning of attracting demand, either because we're putting content together or templates of workflows, or there's a bit of a viral loop of people testing the product. But through the inbound channel, what happened is that people would be knocking on our door. And then if you have a very horizontal product, which is a Swiss Army knife, but people already come with a problem to you, say like, hey, I'm trying to solve this workflow. We were really good at like, let me show you how you solve this workflow with Pipefy. And we were converting super well. So that drove a lot of growth for a few years. Then the next engine that we deployed was an expansions team, because we're like, well, if they can sell to every department, if already landed, let me now try to expand to all the other teams since I'm already within this organization. And that also worked really well. And then at some point, the expansions team was like 3 times larger than the team that was landing new logos. That worked super well as well. But then like around like 2021, when all of that, like the market changed a lot and that turned towards more efficiency mode, we were realizing like, man, like this inbound engine it's not super scalable at this point. Spending a lot of money. We put more money. We're not necessarily generating an increase in outputs of demand and leads. we probably have to realize other ways to go to market. And that's when we started to think like, okay, we need to like unlock outbound. We need to bring new customers and focus and attract new customers, right? Because until that time, expansions in inbound, and then the channels, GSIs, Accenture was already giving us like good pace of growth. But then when we went to the market to try to outbound, it was a disaster. And it was a disaster because what we learned is like we don't really know those people, right? Like if people come to me and have a problem, great. I have a Swiss Army knife. I show them exactly how to solve that. But if I have to knock on someone's door, like a finance professional or an HR professional, I know nothing about their pains.
I don't know my ICP.
I don't know my
Eventually.
ICP. I don't know what they struggle with. I don't know what workflows they're trying to build. And I would be getting to them like, hey, we have this incredible customizable workflow solution. No one gives a shit about that, right?
Yeah.
People care about their very specific problems, how I'm going to move the needle for them, how I'm going to generate positive business outcomes for them. And that was a kind of a realization where we saw like, wow, like we don't really know, right? Like how to proactively go to market because we don't know those people. We don't know how to articulate the impact for those. And it was exactly around that time where we partnered with an incredible mentor that one of our investors connected us with, a guy called Seth Shaw. He used to be the CRO of our table. He asked one very specific question that really hit us in the face, and he was like, "Who would be crazy not to use Pipefy?" And we gave this shallow answer that we thought, product's great, people then. And he was like, "This is shit, right? No, this is too shallow." Like, and that kind of sparked the initial conversation that we're like, man, really, like, we don't really know. There was people that would be crazy. The product has always been amazing, but like our clarity around like, who is that person? Who and why would they be
What's the
crazy?
use case?
When we look at the data, because everyone would come at Pipefy and say, look at the data. What's the use case? Hundreds of different use cases. People were using Pipefy for all kinds of stuff, all kinds of different persona. So there was a challenge, right? And then that's when we started to realize, okay, guys. And then we had teams selling to a bunch of different departments, but our ability to articulate why that department would be insanely crazy not to use the product was very limited. And then we're like, oh, hold on, let's rethink that, right? And then it led to a lot of interesting conversations of like, okay, it's a horizontal platform, but maybe we need to do vertical go-to-market. And we have to understand a few personas. And then we also start to learn how folks like ServiceNow went to market, for example.
Wait, what was the strategy? I'm curious.
ServiceNow, they have a super horizontal platform, but they started owning one persona, which was the IT. So they really nailed at first one use case, which was ITSM. And then after they were in, IT professionals also start to realize, oh, you know what? I can actually use this platform for a lot of other stuff. But they really dominated that persona, that pain point, the understanding of that pain point, and so on. That was kind of what started the conversation around like, maybe like, well, proactively, if I go to market, maybe I'll have to narrow focus in my understanding on like one persona or specific use cases. Of course, I'm still going to maintain the nature of a horizontal platform, which is ultra powerful for expansions and so on, and for inbound. Like organically, we're still going to sell to everyone. But where are we going to dedicate resources and focus in terms of marketing, of like building true go-to-market? So that was kind of a game-changing conversation because we realized like, we have no clue.
How did you solve that issue in terms of figuring out what vertical you should actually penetrate and build a monopoly in Peter Thiel's words, before you can expand as a horizontal platform?
Yeah, the first realization was also the IT teams. So, and then why the IT teams? And even there's an interesting story like with the ServiceNow conversation, like, okay, but we're going to go against ServiceNow? Like, man, those guys are massive. The product's incredible. And then like...
Team is great too.
Exactly, like incredible product, team, every execution, all of that. And then it's not only who would be crazy, but who and why and where they would be crazy. So we started to realize that actually where we're adding like exponential value was exactly on the long tail workflows. So we're actually not going head to head with ServiceNow, but we're actually complementing the long tail of all of those workflows spread throughout the organization that IT couldn't get with ServiceNow. And ServiceNow was an overshot. And then we started to like go deep into the IT persona and go to them and say, hey, this is how I'm going to be your business partner in terms of accelerating digital transformation. I know you have great stuff in your stack, but what you have don't allow you to solve those hundreds of workflows. And I know people need to accelerate that. I know they're in the backlog, and so on. So I think the ability to understand that very specific area where we could articulate value, could articulate impact into that persona and why we're better and when we're better, because it's not in all situations, that was super powerful. So that was the beginning. And then after that, then Pipefy also started to spin out specific business units to go very deep and almost have like a CEO for a specific business unit to build products for specific personas and then build depth of understanding of like what do those folks care about, what are the pains that they have, how can they solve them.
So when you ended up in this 0 to 1 journey again, how did you apply that GTM learnings from Pipefy in terms of not doing everything for everyone?
What we learned from Pipefy drove 100% of how we approached the early days at Camu. The Camu inspiration started exactly looking at like, there's a few big forces coming together right now. AI, of course, then you have tax reform, you have all of this trend around like that AI is leading like how software as a service is turning into service as a software. Then we started to look, okay, what might be some of the areas where AI can bring a disproportionate impact, where you have a lot of pain, where you have like insane amounts of manual work. Interesting data, like medium large companies in Brazil, 98% of them type some type of text documents into the ERP, right? Like it seems like a bit, it's like
Insane.
disconnected from the world we're in, right? With AI. And it's not like we were all insiders from this market, right? But it was a very cold, almost scientific approach, which is literally like, so we had a hypothesis, there was opportunity around like those, like tax compliance companies. Everyone knows it's one of the, maybe the most complex tax
System in the world.
system in the world. Companies spend like an insane amount of hours and money to comply and so on. So we knew there was something there, but literally Yuri and Mosa, like product and Yuri, our CEO and technical leadership, they literally went and talked to 100 companies to understand like where were the biggest pains. And out of 100 companies they talked to, there was 2 companies that were happy with the fiscal solutions that they were using and so on. And then they identified one very specific case that they believed could be like the initial Wedge and first product we could build for, which is the process of like the intake of invoices into the ERP, which is basically making sure that you capture all of the invoices that were issued against the company, that you match them with purchase orders, that you validate that those are correct, that you validate taxes on those invoices, that you work on solving all of the errors, mistakes, and backs and forths with suppliers, and you make sure that those are going correctly into the ERP. Seems like a super niche use case, but it's actually a use case that has a massive pain. And it looked to us like a very good opportunity to start building an AI native solution, because the intake is also the initial, it's literally the intake, it's the start of that process, right? And if you get that right, you also solve a bunch of problems down the road. And what we identified there is like a lot of pain, massive manual work, and massive manual work that AI could already do with good accuracy and good quality. So Camu started from that very specific inspiration. And it was interesting because when we talked to people that were already in the market and worked and built companies in the past, some of those folks are like, this market is taken. It's a red ocean. But if you go a few deep, I think that's a little bit of the value of not being an insider, because you do go with a few deep layers, you go talk to people like absolutely struggling, and they rank that as one of the top problems they have to solve, has massive implications to the business and so on. So after we found one first use case to work on, we had one first customer, we built a platform for the first customer, found a lot of impact for them. Then from a go-to-market perspective, we're like, okay, how do we narrow that down? Who would be crazy not to use Camu? And we started to actively go after that question. And then we had a few hypotheses, right? Like the first 100 conversations, everyone who had pain, we had converted like 1 or 2. We narrowed down the scope a little bit of understanding who would be crazy, maybe those ERPs, maybe those profiles of companies, trying to understand and have a clear hypothesis of who would be crazy and why they would be crazy and why they don't have better alternatives. Did a second version of that. Conversion improved to like close to 17%, first conversation to a closed customer. And then we did a V3, which is like, it seems like this is a very specific, very, very narrow niche, which we decided to focus in the beginning, like one very specific version of ERP. It seems like, oh, it's so small.
We're talking about SAP
Business One.
Business One, yeah.
Right? And then we ran another batch of experiments on that, and then we literally converted like 33% of the accounts that we talked to. And then like consistent like pain and consistent market dominated by 2 legacy players, the solutions that are like older, like not investing a lot in improving that, where we got to something that we felt really good, like, hey, those folks, they would be crazy not to buy our product.
So desperate.
Right. Yeah. Very niche focus in one use case, very niche focus in terms of like where to apply go to market. And this has been super powerful because then literally like how do you accelerate impact in the early stage? Like I truly believe it's how do you apply the highest amount of energy in the smallest possible area and how to make sure that that area is your highest point of leverage. Because then every unit of energy that you put in there, it's converting at a super strong pace.
And you were focusing on conversion.
In the beginning, yes. We were optimizing, like last year when we were discussing on even how we're going to design targets, the way we designed those targets was we didn't even set ourselves a revenue target last year. It was like we want to have X amount of customers that are delighted with the product, right? And we designed the whole model, even the incentives and how those companies were acquiring the product, monthly contracts, because we wanted to have very clear signs if those people were sticking around because they really love the product or because they were stuck in an annual contract and something like that. So last year was much more focused on like, hey, can we get people to delight mode, right? Because if we can get people to delight mode, then I think we're on the right track and the right foundation to really accelerate and scale. And then now we're going into revenue acceleration mode. But even though it is a small niche to start, those are 7,000 companies in Brazil. So you think about building initial traction, initial acceleration, that's enough in the sense of like, how fast can I get to the first 1, 2, 3 millions of ARR? Because if we were to dilute resources across integration with several ERPs, then you go into a nightmare of customization. And we also thought like, how do we ensure that every unit of development on the engineering side also goes into building a product that is people would be more and more crazy not to use, and then we can just sell to those guys faster and faster.
What you said is one of the top pieces of advice of Paul Graham, right? Like, it's better to have 100 customers who absolutely love you than like 1,000 customers who somehow like you. And I think niche, it's very interesting because the word niche, it has sort of a negative sentiment when you think about venture capital. But in fact, it's all about the right niche. It's all about figuring out where you build the monopoly. But to build the monopoly, you got to really become an essential like tool or the system of the records to a certain extent for your customers, especially in such a complex industry like accounting and taxes in Brazil.
Also, like what changes, even compared to Pipefy, like Pipefy was very inefficient in terms of growth. Why? Because of the lack of clarity and lack of focus. So you're dissipating crazy energy.
Yeah.
Like attracting a bunch of leads, massive number of people to sell. Unit economics were not great in the beginning until we start to really understand that. When you look at the reality at Camu, even though it's a small niche, it's literally like if every single company that I talk to out of 3, we're converting 1 in like 33%, like when you look at CAC payback, unit economics are amazing because you convert extremely well. Like you're just putting energy where there is a lot of output coming out of that. So in terms of getting to the first 100, 200, 1,000 of customers, like great. And I think this is one of the counterintuitive things that like you tend to think that to grow fast, you need to do more. And eventually, of course, you have to do more. You have to go to other products, markets, and so on. But I think in the beginning, doing less, it's where you're going to get by far the highest traction.
So you mentioned conversion. And I think it's like it's probably the strongest indicator in terms of that you nailed the niche and you're seeing the signs of product market fit. But what were the other signs from that specific segment of customers that gave you more and more comfort to continue building towards them?
I like to think from 3 perspectives. One is how fast can I convert those folks? Second is this economically viable, right? What are the unique economics? Because I might convert in a good pace, but spend an insane amount of money, like can scale on top of that. And third validation is exactly like, are those folks sticking around and do they really love the product? And for that, we basically did a couple of things. One was exactly by default and intentionally putting them on a monthly contract because we wanted to see like, hey, are you going to stay with us or are you going to leave? You can leave anytime. There's no like
no strings attached.
Exactly. And the other thing that we've done, which our product team put together in the right beginning, there's this, I wasn't aware of that, but super interesting, Chanel's survey. It's a methodology to look for product market fit. How frustrated would people be if they couldn't use your product anymore?
Yeah. And if 60% or more say that they're very frustrated, that's a great sign.
That's exactly it. So I think the benchmark is like Until
You know who popularized that
I don't.
mythology? It's Raul Vohra, actually, the founder of Superhumans.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Now that
It
you
was like
mentioned.
his ETM with Superhumans was very interested. He fired a lot of customers where like during the initial conversations, he couldn't see the immediate like strong pain that would allow them to stay even when there are no strings attached. And he popularized that product market fit is when 60% or more of your customers say that their life will be a total disaster if your solution disappears overnight.
And we ran that like 3 months after like first batches of customers were using the product, and we hit high 50s, like from like a V1 of the product with a lot of stuff still being built, like MVP product not fully ready. I think the other thing when we're selling in the beginning, first customers we're selling literally on like Figma screens. I think this is also validation. Like people want to buy that. You don't even have the product fully ready, but market is really pulling you. Naturally, we start to think, okay, we can dominate this first market. This is one version of one ERP. And then what's next, right? There's other ERPs, there's other use cases. If you do a good job, some of those customers already start to ask, hey, can't you build this for us? And there's other auxiliary workflows.
So you can build like your whole product roadmap based on the market pool for
Exactly.
certain features, like figuring out what is the common sentiment across all of those different requests. And you already have a critical mass that allows you to actually see like substantial amounts of data that allows you to make this product decision.
In all of the first like 20 customers or so, we signed them as design partners. All paid customers, but all customers that we're literally sitting with them every couple weeks. Hey, how is this going? Do you like this? You don't like this? We're developing those new screens. Do you like those screens? Do you don't like those screens? What would you do differently? Right, so literally building with those folks and listening to them, also building that relationship where they really trust us. And it's a super fair trade in the end because I'm not charging for implementation. I'm charging on a monthly basis. You have a massive problem. You don't have a way to solve it. I want to learn from your problems and I want to benefit other customers with that. One thing that I didn't mention, but I think it's interesting, when we had one customer, we said no to 3 others.
What were the reasons why you said no to?
One example was, I think, very emblematic. Massive organization came with a massive RFP, massive roadmap of stuff they wanted us to build for them. And the discussion in the beginning was a little bit like, wow, it's an incredible brand, super well known. Should we build for them? At the same time, when we took a super cold approach to that, like, guys, we're going to commit all of our engineering resources for the rest of our life here to try to build this, and they still are not going to be happy. Because it's a massive enterprise organization, going to have more and more needs and more requests. And we're going to be stuck here building for them. They won't be happy. At the same time, if we allocate our resources to this niche, we can delight and ship 10 features in the following 7 months that will delight that audience. So we had the discussions like, no, let's say no. And it can be very tempting.
But long term is very important because one of the real red flags is the revenue concentration, right? Like if your revenue comes from like, I don't know, 1, 2 customers, like 3 customers, like what actually power do you have over your own decision making?
And I think the key driver was really like, we're probably still not going to delight them because the product is such an early stage and they're going to have endless needs and asks for customization that we're going to be stuck here forever and they won't be happy. So we think you're going to have a massive logo to claim. They're not going to be super delighted.
Yeah.
So like, what is the audience that we can delight? Focus on that. In the beginning, it feels a little like, shit, is this going to work? But a few months down the road, we said like, wow, that's the best decision that we took.
What are some of the growth hacks that worked for you?
In the beginning, it was also a bit of scientific project, like a few hypotheses. How can I generate demand? Let's go test a few things. So outbound to a few folks through LinkedIn and try those messages, automate some of that stuff. Then go talk to partners on the SAP ecosystem that kind of own the relationship with all of those customers and see how that works. And then literally we found almost like a content creator, like an influencer on the SAP Business One landscape.
There is such a thing.
Exactly.
Oh my
I
God.
didn't know that. And
in Brazil, there are influencers for everything.
And then this guy had a massive base of followers, like everyone knows him, reached out to him. And like, it was interesting because trying to do the cold outbound thing and trying to see if we could generate demand, a lot of effort, not a lot of output. And then we met this guy and then talked to him and he proposed a partnership. This guy literally like in 2 days scheduled like 30 conversations. Like for us, 30 conversations with extremely high qualified companies. And then this is kind of this stuff that we're thinking like, wow, this is like what we call fast moving water. I would take a massive amount of time to try to get those 30 conversations on my own. So that worked really well. And then we also started to connect and engage with the partners network, like SIs that sell and implement SAP Business One in Brazil. There's natural alignment of incentives with those folks. And we also start to get a lot of traction on generating demand from them and partnering with them. Like literally I've been doing that 100% on my own, like for the first year. But then finding fast moving water on the demand gen and then like leveraging AI to automate all of my all the work.
What does the actual practical use cases of like working AI automation look like in your specific case as an individual and on a company level?
It's crazy working with AI. A lot of people think like, man, you came out of 10-year journey out of Pipefy, like why in the hell
Like, why don't you retire?
why in the hell are you going to start something from scratch again? One of the things that I took in consideration, aside from the amazing opportunity, the team and all of that, I think it's also very bad timing for you not to be in the field and not to be operating because things are changing so much. I think if you sit in the sidelines for those 2 years, like...
You got to be an early adopter.
Absolutely. So the way I approached this was, first of all, like if you're trying to nail go-to-market and focus, I wanted to make sure that I knew exactly how to sell and who buys, why they buy, what is the business impact that we generate before trying to add sales folks that will go there and try to figure that out. Second is like, I wanted to use this as an experiment, like stretch the number of opportunities that I am able to handle on my own with AI. And then my thought process was really around salespeople spend like 25% of the time selling on average, and 75% of the time is just pure back office work. So literally the work that I started doing is mapping, okay, what are all those things? How can I apply that into my reality? And I think the core foundation starts off and understanding what is the workflow before you just throw AI is important. So I think we'll start with that and then I'll tell how I applied AI on top of that. So literally B2B SaaS, it's really around your ability to articulate and learning from that customer what is the scenario they're in, why that is a problem, what is the impact of the current scenario, what is the future state they would like to be. Most importantly, what is the positive impact of going to that future state? And those things are very different. I'll give you an example. At Pipefy, people would say, I need a more customizable solution. And that's very shallow. Why do you need a customizable solution? People don't buy a customizable solution. I need a customizable solution because I don't move fast enough. I need to ask for IT. Why is that a problem? Oh, it costs a lot. I can't react fast enough. Okay, now you're starting to get to the reasons why people would buy something. So I think mapping that extremely well in the journey, like scenario, impacts of that, future state, why does that matter? What is the positive impact of that? Understanding the delta between those two scenarios. We like to say a lot at Pipefy, like no delta, no deal. If I can't articulate a very clear delta between first scenario and future state and impact, there's no deal there. Then I understand what do they need, requirements from a product perspective to get there, how they're going to measure success, and then I'm going to tell them how I do it better, and proof points. So nailing that in that narrative and playing that back to the customer in that level of detail, like this is where you are, this is why this matters, this is the impact if you solve this, this is how we can solve this, is ultra important. And as much clarity you can get in terms of playing that back to the customer, like more powerful it is. Also important because nowadays there are so many people in the sales process that sometimes your champion will have to sell that internally. And your ability to help them sell that internally and build the narrative and help them explain why that matters and how it moves the needle, why the business case exists, the ROI and so on is very important. And then AI is extremely powerful for that. So if you start from a call transcript, like 4 years ago we were learning it, doing consulting with companies in the US to learn this methodology, and they were teaching us like note taking, literally. Like, hey, this is how you note take during a call to get all of the details of that framework to play it back in details to the customer. And right now, from a call transcript, and then with Claude and a bunch of projects, literally all of the back office can be automated. So literally doing a call, like populating all of those information in an incredible level of detail into the CRM, like current scenario, impact, and so on, automating an ROI calculation, like what is the business case for that deal, automating a power score for that deal, like how powerful is that deal, how likely to close into a few categories and why. You get all of that automated. You get a deck, a proposal, like fully automated from the transcript, but with an insane level of detail describing their reality and their words. Like, this is the scenario, this is the impact, this is the ROI, these are the priorities that you mentioned by order, and like this is how we solve each one of those. So all of that are things that it takes a lot of time for you to do really well if you do it manually. And with AI, you not only do much faster, but you do so much better. Then not only that, you do all of like live artifacts to map all of the objections and questions that were asked in all of the calls and have that live populated to the product team. I was looking at the CRM, like I'm literally managing 68 opportunities at the same time. Like, that's something that would be impossible before.
You're talking about 75% of time spent.
Exactly, right?
That
And
is now automated. What percentage of that you think is currently automated?
in terms of like the elimination of the back office work, I think, I don't know, like 50 to 70% of that has been eliminated. But not only has been eliminated, I'll give you a very tangible example. Those proposals that we're sharing with customers, when we started Camu, it took us like a full afternoon, I think, with 3 people to nail in an incredible level of detail, something that was super powerful. Like, hey, this is your scenario. Like 3 people for like 3-4 hours. That is being done literally from the transcript of a call in like 5 minutes. Faster and with much higher quality.
What about the front office? Like, where do you see the impact of AI in the field?
I think when you think more transactional deals and more transactional opportunities, I think those definitely would be automated. So you think more inbound motions, like engaging with customers, and I think there's a lot of that already, like in terms of bots, even voice and stuff
Yeah.
of that. I think on the SMB side and like transactional fast sales cycles, transactional purchases, those I think would just go faster and faster and improve. I think what will stay is like on the more enterprise side. I mean, face-to-face with customers is still really important. But then like being able to really spend time with customers playing back why the business makes sense, that deal makes sense, and not having to spend time trying to build the case. I think you just like potentialize the time spent with people. And I think that will remain relevant, I think.
You mentioned a number of interesting things. I think one thing that is slightly out of the box is you wanted to understand every element of sales and kind of write your own sales playbook before you build out the sales organization. And I think a lot of founders, first of all, they don't like sales. They love products and building, and they don't like to sell. And they think they can half-ass their way into sales by bringing someone senior, ideally from one of these large corporates to which you're trying to sell or around which you're trying to sell. And this dude will build out the sales organization. And it feels like you have a totally different perspective on that.
Yeah. We went through some of those experiences at Pipefy as well. Like, and I think what we learned is that like building a plane is very different than flying a plane. Like we hire incredible people that have been incredible professionals in large enterprise organizations in the past and super successful. But then sometimes when you get to a scenario where like an environment where you have to like figure it out why people are going to buy this, and like you don't have all the assets, you don't have all the answers, that's a completely different game. It's a different role. It's a different like job that has to be done. I think having that in mind is really important. And that's also one of the reasons that I really wanted to do it my own and really nail that. And also really stress how much can be done with AI. And then now I'm getting to a point where like, now I feel good that I can actually add more people in the most efficient way. Because I know what works. I can teach them how to sell and like why people buy. Like I can give them a stack of how their life can be automated and they can like handle more. And this is also one of the things that, as I said, has been fun because as the sales organization grows, like at Pipefy, at some point, like the revenue team had like more than 200 people, right? And then even though you want to change things, it's hard because sometimes there is a lot of impact for you to move things around and so on. So being able to build from a like blank page has been awesome, and really think about how to use AI and also how to put impact at the center of the customer journey. Not only on how we generate demand, but how we sell and how we promise impact, but then how you make sure that you're delivering the impact that you've promised, right? And how you make all of that journey around like mapping impact, promising the impact, aligning the impact you're going to generate, tracking and making sure customer gets there. Because I think this is also something that is becoming more and more relevant, especially nowadays, as I really like this concept of how risk moved from buyer to seller. In the past, people were buying like 3-year upfront contracts on premise. They would pay up front 6 months to see if that
Yeah,
was going
switching
to
costs
work.
are high, lock-in was
Exactly.
there.
Now you're going to a world where people are paying for outcomes, right?
Yeah.
So the risk is much more on who is selling. Recurring revenue is starting more and more as recurring impact, and your ability to map, articulate, deliver that impact, and make sure the customer realize that you're getting that impact.
So how do you run the sales org as it's growing?
I think there's a few things that are really important, and some of the things that we really, really nailed. I think that we nailed at Pipefy, especially because scarcity is a very powerful thing, right? And especially because we were like sometimes struggling and brute forcing our way through, it forced us to really go deep into understanding what was working and what was not working and really optimizing towards that. And what I mean by that is that in terms of ritual, I think the most powerful thing that we have implemented, it was just a monthly results meeting, but the format that we ran that was really interesting because we're not just reporting what happened. Of course, we're starting with the numbers, but it was really a ritual to go extremely deep into like the reason behind those numbers. The way we articulated was like FCA, fact, cause, and action, right? And in the beginning, it was kind of misleading. People didn't know exactly, and like, why didn't we hit the number? We didn't do enough demos. But that's not a cause. That's a fact. We did less demos. But then you start to go really deep. Why did we do less demos? No, actually, the conversion on like demo, like lead to demo on the SDR level is where it broke. Okay, why that broke specifically? So that like deep curiosity in terms of understanding the levers of the organization and really understanding what levers to pull and where the problem is, because there's so much stuff that can break or that can go well. When you're scaling a sales organization, the number is just the final output. But the number that you accomplished can happen for several reasons, right? It can break on generating demand. It can break on converting that demand into initial conversation. It can break on the conversion after that. It can break on the average ticket that you're selling. So that level of clarity in terms of like all the metrics of the funnel and every month going ultra deep, understanding exactly the fact, the cause, what is the root cause, and then applying actions to that very specific root cause. It's easy, I think, people to jump on conclusions and like, that's what we need to do. Let's do more and that and that. Sometimes there is a symptom, but what is the root cause if you don't, if you don't really
And
understand?
people confuse that.
A lot. And then if you don't give the medicine to the right problem, sometimes it's not going to work, right?
Yeah.
So I think that level of obsession on understanding, and not only when things didn't go well, but also when things went well. Alessio was super good at that. Like we did a massive result, really good. Why? Right? And that's a counterintuitive approach because if people are like, it's time to celebrate. No, yeah, let's celebrate, but why? What happened? Is there something that we can do different? Did we find an audience? Are we converting more? Where did we improve? Can we double down on this? So I think that process of really understanding those levers really, really well and really control, like dominating. And then as we did that over and over, like sales leaders, they were so good at that. They would come to a meeting like, hey, I know exactly what happened. This is what I'm testing you this month. And then like the iteration of hypotheses and approaches of like test a new approach, test a new thing, because you understand exactly what metric broke, like where was the problem. Okay, I'm going to test something to try to improve. This is very specific, and you're going to measure this. And the next cycle, we're going to bring an overview not only on the result, but on the result of this experiment as well that has a given hypothesis. So I think this is something that we did super well. And I think that's one of the most important. Of course, there's a lot of important rituals and selling and so on, but I think this has been the most powerful one.
Everybody digs in the factors of failures and deconstructing failures and learning from failures, but learning from success, it's a fresh idea. Okay, so what are the successes that you experienced in terms of the milestones, and what did you learn from those successes?
That's a very good question. We truly found something where we can clearly articulate why there is an opportunity and where we can win in the short term. And I think this is a very important milestone. In the beginning, you have an idea, you're trying to figure out if people want to buy, if people don't want to buy, if people like what you're building, and so on. So I think now we're moving into a new phase, which is great. Found something that people want. I'm building something people like. How do I scale this thing?
What about learnings in terms of how do you convert this initial strong market pool from a specific niche into a repeated demand gen motion?
We're going exactly into that discussion. We already found a few things that work. So the network of partners has been giving us a lot of pulls that is working. But naturally, there's so much conversation going on right now also around distribution. How distribution is the new mode and how like owning
Which I personally believe in.
Absolutely. I think there's this opportunity around not only the product, but it's also a market that used to buy through those partners and all of that. I think there's a lot of opportunities to probably rethink also that structure and how we build those communities. I think there's a lot of opportunity to take information to those folks, to take value, to teach them about how the world is changing and how AI can impact their work. And there's something they really want and they're interested in. So we really believe on, I think, first leading with value, right?
Yeah.
And by leading with value, I think there's a lot of opportunity to connect with those folks and get closer to them and build a brand people see as also something they're excited to partner with and to learn with. Right?
The community is really underappreciated strategy because it seems so small. Like, how much time can it take to build a trust within the community? How much would it take to get ambassadors within the community that would help to convert more and more people into community? It seems that it's so long, but when you think about where we are at a point in time, it is such a natural thing to do because it's also very human, right? So you don't build community by using a better AI. You're building community by building like personal relationships with people. And I think that's an interesting differentiation that finally becomes very, very important for companies given where we are in space and time.
100%. I think even though AI is accelerating a lot of stuff, I think what people don't want is like receive an AI generated outbound. That's something I personally believe is going to be, AI can give you some level of personalization and improve, but like, I mean, how can you lead with value in the end? How can you generate value for those folks and kind of own the right to be in that conversation? That's kind of where we're shifting focus in terms of like, okay, now that we need to 10x this thing, what are the other areas where we need to start putting some time on and to build?
My closing question for you will be looking back from, and I'm going to screw this up, but Hospital Pequeno Príncipe to Pipefy to Camu. What is the lesson you most want Brazilian founders to learn about building credibility before the market gives it to you?
That's a very good one. Once we did sales training with an American guy, and he was telling us a story where they closed a specific deal, like, and then the team was ready to celebrate, and they're like, okay, let's go out and celebrate. We signed this deal. And then what he said at that time, like, no, we're going to celebrate when we actually deliver what we promised to those folks. That's when we're going to celebrate. And I think there is this big change in terms of like how those interactions are going. It relates to what I mentioned in terms of having impact at the center. So I think like showing to those folks that you're truly into helping them achieve business impact, like truly working towards that, this is the important thing.
Paying forward. Felipe, it's been such an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, guys, for listening to TGC Operators. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please rate us on Spotify and YouTube, follow us on the J-Curve podcast, and subscribe to our newsletter at www.thejcurve.com.